Bryn was a fantastic dog. He was much better as a dog than I was as a handler. I was the soap at the end of the rope, not the other way around. He made me look good. In fact, if he'd been with a really good dog handler, I think that it would have been an exceptional pairing. But whatever you asked of Bryn, he just did. I can remember our first set of nights being stationed over at Wellingborough, being asked to clear Wellingborough town centre where there was a public order issue, probably 50, 60 people. And this was a dog that was under 12 months old, and he just lapped it up, cleared the street. You'd think he'd been doing it for years. Bryn was a puppy that was donated by the Guide Dog Association. And when I was looking for a dog, he was actually too young to go through the training. But we'd had several failures with dogs that we were trying to train, and it was decided at 9 months to take a risk with him, which was probably the youngest dog they'd ever trained. In fact, he just loved it, was a phenomenal dog, passing out very quickly. The bond that you see between a handler and their dog, it's like no other. It's more of a marriage than partners. You understand the way the dog works, the dog understands the way you work, and the results that you can achieve when you get that bond are second to none. They're an outstanding contribution to police work. When I joined, we had some legendary dog handlers, and I always looked up to them and thought, that's the job for me.
I was on the dog section for about 7.5 years. Loved every minute of it. It had its ups, its downs. You know, the training is phenomenal because you've got to keep them dogs up to that standard. But the variety of work was excellent. I worked all over the county. First met my husband because of being a dog handler.
So between 1999 and 2006, I was a police dog handler for Northants Police. It's a real challenging role. As I see, one of the best roles in the police.
I joined Northamptonshire Police in 1985. Had a fantastic career. So I started off at Guildhall Box, as many people did, walking the town centre. Progressed through onto vehicles, and then very quickly moved on to traffic. Eventually becoming an ARV officer when we started arming the cars on traffic. I'd always wanted to be a dog handler and managed to get into the dog section.
The reason I became a dog handler and what attracted me to that role is I come from the Northeast. I was still very young. I was only 22 when I became a dog handler. But in the Northeast, I'd worked with working dogs all of my life. We would go down the greyhound tracks. We would be walking the dogs for the dogs that were going to race before they went. There was hunting dogs within my family. So working dogs was something I was very familiar with, and it was a really natural step. I was the first female dog handler, and to be the first at something is never easy. But somebody told me I couldn't do it, so that didn't work for me. And I was a good police officer by then, so there's no reason, just because I was a female, that I wasn't going to do something that really appealed to me. So yeah, I am really proud of that, and I hope that I've left a bit of a pathway for the females that have come behind me to understand that you can actually do whatever you set your mind to do within this organisation.
I've been in the dog section in Northamptonshire now for about 12.5 years in total, with EMOPs regionally now for the past 2.5 years. During my service, my police dogs that I've had have been invaluable pretty much on every shift that I go out and work on. There's been instances where we've caught armed robbers, we've been to domestics and caught people that have run away from from houses. When we have a series of crimes happening in an area and we have special operations on, the dogs are there to try and assist. And when we can break down a pattern of offending that's happened over a period of weeks in an area that we're hurting, it's a great feeling. It's really rewarding. It's very positive for us. The highs and the lows of a dog section, you'll either be really high or really low after a shift. If you have a good result and you catch some people that are committing crime, it's the best feeling in the world. But just the buzz really of using a dog operationally to do things that nobody else in the force can do. It's specific to a dog. They can track and they can find people that have gone from scenes of crimes, and even the offenders are surprised when they find us behind them. Leicestershire and Northamptonshire share the same kennelling facilities. We're in Leicestershire at the moment. This is their dog section. You can see behind me there's 18 kennels that are laid out, which are supported by staff that come in and look after the dogs in the morning and in the evening, and provide kennelling for them overnight. Day-to-day business for me and for most dog handlers is a general duties dog, a big German Shepherd or Rottweiler we have had in the past, or some other breeds of large dog for general duties. We do have specialist dogs as well that can find drugs, cash, firearms, explosives. But for me, generally, I've worked at a general duties dog. Well, I do have a drugs dog as well, and I have worked at drugs dogs for a number of years.
Bryn was just such a character. He was so lovable. A classic, for instance, with him, we were walking in East Tunsbury. My daughter was probably 2, probably no older than that, a toddler. It was a rest day. As we're walking along, stolen motorcycle comes roaring through, 2 on the bike, and he could, you know, from just being interested in sniffing and running around playing, he instantly switched on. He could just see that I was more alert, more interested, and they stopped the bike. We wandered over towards them just as they were about to leave. Identified myself as a police officer, and one gave himself up, one didn't, and was detained by the dog. You know, and that is him all over. He never switched off if you didn't want him to. He was the sort of dog I could take into a school and be fussed, petted, would be the star of a classroom, and 5 minutes later would be detaining someone with a knife. He could switch it on and switch it off, and there aren't many dogs that will ever do that. I can remember this incident as if it was 10 minutes ago. I relive it, and for 10 to 15 years I found that very difficult to cope with. I have triggers that will trigger the flashbacks, and they're flashbacks, not memories. You know, it's as if you're there. I can smell the gun barrel, I can taste it, I can feel the pain. A couple of years ago I went through a new system called EMDR, and that helped me quite dramatically, and probably find, if I'm in the right mood, talking about it quite cathartic. So it was a night in February. We just started a set of nights. The dog section, funnily enough, was under a survey to see whether the dogs were a viable asset in terms of cost. So consequently, we were volunteering for any job that we possibly could to maximise our use. We'd already dealt with a serious domestic in Northampton, where the person was armed with a knife, and the job came in Earthling Borough. Can we go over there again? Domestic, subject armed with a knife. En route, the offender had left the area and the weapon had been recovered. I still went and met the local officers that were there at the scene, where they identified the offender, and a plan was made to go in 2 o'clock in the morning to his flat and effect an arrest, and we used shields and the dog at the time. Whilst we were discussing this, screams came back from the house, and it turns out that the offender had gone into the rear of the premises and was attacking the 2 girls in the house, mother and daughter. The 2 local officers went forward, and I stopped them and said, you know, this is a job for the dog. Let's do it properly. Got Bryn out. At no time in those circumstances had anyone mentioned firearms. You know, I'd been a firearms officer. I did 3 years as an AFO on the ARVs, so we would have handled it very, very differently. We approached the front of the house, which was down a very steep stairway. It was set below the road level, like on a slope. And as we got to the front of the house, the offender came out with a hunting rifle pointing at the mother's head. I immediately thought, that's a real rifle. and put out an assistance call. I wanted it to remain a precise situation, so I wanted us to keep tabs on where he was. And the house had a square fronted bay window. He went one side of the bay window, I went the other with the dog. And then you're left with the tools that every police officer has, talking. You can't do anything else other than try and talk the situation down. So it was opening the conversation, telling him, you know, no one's got hurt yet, we can sort this out. I'm Ian, I'm here to sort it out with you. He moaned about the dog barking, and I'd pushed the dog close into the house wall and was half exposed. Without warning, he opened fire and shot me. So you fly back through the ground, landed on the ground heavily, and you think, that doesn't happen in training. You know, that isn't something that we do. You know, we talk this out in training and they give themselves up. This hasn't happened. And I really didn't know what to do then at that point. Bryn was still next to me, and I made the decision to drive the dog in. So, loosed his collar. I knew I'd been struck in the leg. I couldn't move my right leg. And verbally drove him in to bite the offender. As he did that, the woman that was being held hostage moved away, caused a momentary confusion in the dog, which gave the offender the opportunity to shoot the dog, which he did straight in the head and killed him. So she ran past me, at which point he shot her. So there was, the dog, Bryn, was dead. I was incapacitated and she was lying on the ground bleeding. I actually wasn't bleeding that badly. The round had stopped in my leg. From there on, I suppose the situation deteriorated. So he removed the silencer that was on the weapon, reloaded the magazine, and then I had the barrel of the gun put in my mouth. And you just try and talk. You know, there was nothing else to do. Fortunately for me, she was screaming, and her screams detracted him away from me, and he actually started to drag her up towards my police van on the road, saying he was coming back for me. Well, there was no way I was going to be taken hostage, and I managed to crawl out and into a neighbour's property where we barricaded the door in. To cut a long story short, I suppose, really, or to come to the resolution, he ended up being detained. There was a police family lived in the same road opposite the house, and the lady that had gone in there to hide, Pat Harris, who was a detective at the time, was in the house. The offender shot the lock off the door and went into the house, where Pat wrestled with him. Again, another round, narrowly missing Pat. They ended up falling down the stairs, where he was incapacitated enough for other police officers, unarmed police officers, to in effect arrest. And you know, the case went to court and he was convicted with a life sentence. So the National Police Bravery Award means so much to me personally, because it's an award where you're nominated by your peers. It's not something that's given as a result of a survey or anything like that. You are nominated by those, your colleagues. It was run by the Police Federation. It was quite early on when we received it. So we were nominated. We went down to 10 Downing Street with all the other nominees. We ended up at the event and being the recipients from it, you know, and it is a real honour. As well as receiving the National Police Bravery Award, which is only awarded for one instance every year. Myself and Pat were also received the Queen's Commendation for Bravery, which was presented to us by Prince Charles. And again, very, very honoured to get it.
I have two dogs. I have a Springer Spaniel called Billy, who's been working within the police for the last 7 years. He's capable of detecting drugs, he can find cash and he can find firearms. He's a very experienced dog. I've got an 18-month-old German Shepherd, a jet black German Shepherd, that I've had since he was 6 weeks old. He's just qualified in November last year, and he's operational now, and he's already had a number of successes in tracking and catching burglars, car thieves and other offenders.
I had a general purpose dog, which is German Shepherd, and his name was Geordie. So it doesn't take a detective to work out why, but that's what he got christened by the rest of the team. He was fantastic. So we did tracking, searching, criminal work with him, and you know, the training that you have to put into these dogs is phenomenal. What you see as a police officer, or a member of the public, when the dogs are actually out working, is the tip of the iceberg. All the work that goes on behind the scenes in training the dogs to be as good as they actually are is just unbelievable.
We had two types of dogs: general duties dogs, so what people would see the big dogs as German Shepherds. I had one called Ralph, one called Evander. There was a nickname, he had the top of his ear bitten off by a dog called Tyson. And my last working dog was a Rottweiler called Jake. I also had two small search dogs. One called Paddy was a black Labrador that was trained to search for guns and drugs. By the time I got Jake, I'd been on the dog section about 3 or 4 years. So Jake was one of the first Rottweilers that we'd had, both in Northamptonshire and one of the few in the country. He just had that wow factor about him, but the beauty about Jake was he was like a light switch. You could turn him on to be a police dog, fully operational and quite a ferocious hold to him, but also as a family dog and a family pet, very different from a working dog. He could switch it on and off at almost the click of a finger or a command. Once
there was a car that rammed a police vehicle off the road. The officers were fine, thankfully, but the offenders ran off through a dozen fields. The helicopter was up, couldn't find anybody because of the crops and the vegetation that was there. So of course me and Geordie turn up. We have the longest track that I ever did in my 7 years, and we apprehended the suspects, which was really nice because the officers had had a real bad thing happen, and then we were able to get the offenders sorted out. And from a personal point of view, on Northampton town centre, outside of a kebab shop, a guy ran out with a samurai sword attacking everybody, and it was probably one of the very few times when you're in the right place at the right time. So the officers clearly had to stand back. Again, I emphasise we didn't have stab vests, we didn't have any of the PPE other than wooden batons. So the dog and I got out, and we robustly apprehended that offender with the samurai sword. So again, a really good piece of work by the dog.
One of my proudest moments was representing Northants Police at the G8 summit at Gleneagles in 2005, and spent the whole week there up at the summit when there was a large-scale public order incident with protesters breaking through the fences and onto the site, and the dogs almost held the line until we can get resources to police it properly, and they were policed in by a Chinook helicopter. So it's a real iconic moment in my police service.
One weekend we made 12 separate arrests in a 3-day period, all for crime, all a result of searches and tracks. It was a busy weekend, but he just lapped it up. He was a dog that was never put off by anything. I can think of times where I've seen him assaulted, struck, and it was straight away, if we're going to play that game, then he'll play it, and the offenders always came off second best. Probably one of the noticeable ones was an operation in Corby during the day. It was a person wanted for attempted murder. We actually came across him, directed in by the helicopter. It was in a built-up area, so you had to have the ultimate faith in sending the dog under those circumstances. The offender ran, and the dog brought him down. There isn't anyone else that was going to do that.
Dogs are always going to be important to policing because they'll do things that no matter what technology we bring in place, no matter how good we are, no matter how big the equipment that we have is, it's still not that thinking, breathing, living animal that can think for itself and has 220 million olfactory glands in its nose that can find the bad guys. There's always going to be a place for police dogs in modern policing.
Last chance and we'll send the dog to find you.
A dog can achieve many things that a police officer can't achieve, and indeed it can do a lot of work in a very short period of time. So I'll give you an example. If officers went to a factory that had been broken into in the middle of the night and you've got thousands of square metres that need searching, that's very labour intensive for police forces and for police officers in times of austerity when the numbers are limited. So we can bring a police dog there, we can search the building and we can clear the building or find offenders within a very short period of time, which then frees up other officers to allow them to go about their day-to-day business. And indeed, the dogs will track away from scenes of crimes, and they'll find people that are hiding or people that have just made off. And those are people that you'll very rarely, if ever, find without the use of a police dog. So although policing has changed a lot over the last 10 to 15 years, the basic role of a police dog is the same.
I'm not built for running. I've never seen anybody outrun a dog with 4 legs. The fact that it's got 42 teeth as well is a real deterrent, and its nose is so powerful bit of equipment. We just underestimate just how valuable the dogs can be. They can find their sense of smell, and their ability to work for hours on end is just well beyond myself and any of my colleagues.
Protection of life is one of our key responsibilities as a police officer, and you have to make those decisions. And for 20 years I have questioned whether that was the right decision I made at the time, and I've had a lot of people talk it through with me countless times. And probably if I was in that situation now, I would make exactly the same decision. And that shows the dedication of the dogs, because we often talk about them willing to give their lives in order to protect the handler or to protect anyone else. And the reality of it is they are willing to do that, and they do get killed in doing it. They're a resource that can't be matched by anything else. They'll do the work of 10 police officers, they'll do the work of 30 police officers in some public order situations. Even with modern technology, even with the likes of drones and scent machines coming on, a dog works so quickly and so accurately, they still can't be matched. It might not be the same for the future, but here and now, they're just an asset that stands alone in terms of efficiency and doing the jobs that no one else can do. Whether it's tracking, whether it's stopping a fleeing suspect, searching for missing people, they'll cover such huge areas. And yes, we've got helicopters, we've got all those other things to support it, but the bottom line is you can't match what a dog and a handler will do on the ground.